finally set free after being held in prison since 1989.
This is a tragic story being told over and over again. Incidents like this have happened numerous times in USA, but unlike stories that are in fact fictions, all these incidents are rooted in reality. No part of this is fiction. The tropes of all these stories are eerily same. A black man gets convicted, spends 20 to 30 years in prison, and is then set free after it finally dawns upon the criminal justice system that the man had been wrongly convicted and imprisoned. Just a few days back, a black man named Sidney Holmes was freed after serving 34 years in prison for a crime he did not even commit. He has joined a long list of the black people who had been wrongly imprisoned and whose lives were torn apart. In this video, we bring to you the story of this man, Sidney Holmes, along with trying to explain what makes the US criminal justice system so heavily loaded against the blacks. But before that, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Oneindia. Sidney Holmes was convicted and sentenced to 400 years in prison for the 1988 armed robbery of two patrons at a Broward County gas station. He was falsely identified as the getaway driver by the victim who was robbed at gunpoint. He had actually become a subject through a very strange set of circumstances. One of the victims had described the perpetrator's vehicle as a brown Oldsmobile Cutlass with a tan top and a hole in the trunk. The victim's brother, who heard this description, believed that he was robbed earlier in the day by the same perpetrators driving the same vehicle. Then, weeks later, the victim's brother saw a brown Cutlass while driving and provided the license plate number to authorities. This vehicle was registered to Sidney Holmes. Although Holmes' vehicle had key differences from the perpetrator's vehicle, and he also even had a solid alibi, he was with multiple family members who had spent the entire day with him at Father's Day celebration, but he still became the prime suspect. He was identified by one of the victims in a second photo lineup despite not being identified in an initial photo lineup that also contained his photo. There was no physical or scientific evidence nor any corroborating witnesses linking him to the crime. But despite all this, he was convicted. At that time, prosecutors had asked the judge to sentence him to 800 years in prison after he had failed to identify the accomplices in the robbery. However, the judge, who deemed the requested punishment excessive, instead sentenced him to a 400-year prison sentence. Holmes was just 23 years old when he was wrongfully convicted. Today, he is 57. This is not the first time that miscarriage of justice at such huge scale has happened. Let me give you just a few more names in order to clear this point and to emphasize how blacks are treated very differently from their white counterparts in USA. The first name is Lamar Johnson. For nearly 3 decades, he sat in prison serving a life sentence for a murder that he never committed. In February, a St. Louis judge overturned his conviction and ordered him to be released from prison. He was in prison for 28 years. Another man, Rolf Blaine Smith, was released in February after spending 21 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. Then there is Ronnie Long, who was wrongly sentenced to 80 years in prison for rape and burglary. He had to spend 44 years behind bars. Next name is Raymond Flanks. He had to spend 40 years for a murder he did not commit. He was only 20 years old back then, and today he is 61. All of these are Americans who are black. These are just a few black persons whose most precious years of their lives were lost due to the racial bias. In fact, a report released in September last year had highlighted this very point. It had reviewed the cases of 3,200 innocent defendants exonerated in the United States since 1989 and had found that black Americans are 7 times more likely than white Americans to be falsely convicted of serious crimes. The Race and Wrongful Convictions report had highlighted that since 2017, an astonishing 3,249 innocent black people have been falsely convicted, and they served nearly 12 years in prison on average. More than half of the people convicted of crimes and later exonerated because they were innocent are black, 53%, even though black constitute 13.6% of the American population. In other words, black people are overrepresented in wrongful convictions at a rate nearly 4 times their proportion of population. The number of people convicted of crimes who have been proved innocent has increased 70% in the last 5 years, and a majority of them are black. For homicides, the risk of a wrongful conviction in cases where the victim was white is nearly twice that of cases where the victim was black. Racial disparities are even worse for sexual assault crimes, where black people are 8 times more likely to be wrongly convicted than a white person for a crime involving sexual violence. Again, the risk of a wrongful conviction increases dramatically if the victim is white as opposed to a person who is black. Racial disparities are most extreme in cases involving drug crimes. Black people are 19 times more likely to be wrongly convicted of a drug crime than white people. Across all crime categories, black people wrongly convicted of a crime are likely to spend much longer periods of time in unjust incarceration than innocent white people. The report identified many of the specific reasons for wrongful convictions and concluded that police or prosecutorial misconduct are often the source of these miscarriages of justice, and the underlying reasons for these miscarriages is racism. In short, the US justice system is heavily loaded against the black Americans. We hope you would like this new video. Thank you so much for watching.
Sidney Holmes' family greeted him the second he stepped foot out the door.